Greetings and welcome back. We are in Senior AP English A, and our objective for the hour is to continue with our work regarding Chaucer. I just want to kind of summarize, and then I'm going to step to what's called the general prologue. You'll understand a lot more what that means by the end of this hour. Chaucer is so influential for us because he's constituted as the father of the English language. Jot down in your notes why that's the case. What makes him so important in the history of the English language? Like, why should we care so much about Chaucer? It isn't so much what he said, but what? The language he said it in. You bet. That's it exactly. The language he said it in. That is to say, Chaucer is fairly bold. He will select a fairly new hybrid tongue that we will call today, of course, English. Chaucer, in many ways, then, gives us the language that ultimately Shakespeare will, dare I say it, perfect. And from Shakespeare on 1600, well, when you were studying Romeo and Juliet as freshmen, you were studying the actual English of Shakespeare and Shakespeare's day. So it takes about, let's say it this way for your notes, it takes about 600 years to get from Beowulf to Shakespeare's Hamlet, a text we'll talk about here in a few weeks as you get ready to graduate, okay? And in that 600 years, the most important single figure is, without a doubt, Chaucer. Okay? So his Canterbury Tales stands alone for no other reason, if you don't need any other reason, than that. But we got other reasons. Okay? Canterbury Tales is also going to constitute one of the classic set of lines, poetic lines, that we have in the English language. Chaucer elects to tell his story in poetic lines. Okay, so he writes poetry. So when you're looking at page 140 there, you're looking at poetic attempts. All right, he's going to tell his story in poetry form. But there's something else that we want to point out, and this is what we call Chaucer's mission, or Chaucer's objective, all right, for your notes. And what we mean when we talk about Chaucer's objective is that he's kind of torqued off about a couple of things. Now, I'm going to use a word here that I want you to put in your notes, and then we'll define it. Some of you will already kind of be able to define it. That word is iconoclast. Iconoclast. I-C-O-N-O. Icono. Now, what is an icon? In religious circles, what is an icon? A sacred icon is what? Anything like, for example, a church that people venerate or bow to, that kind of thing. Crosses in a church are icons, if you will. An iconoclast, I like this way to say it, Mr. Nelson. Iconoclast, or to be iconoclastic, is to be iconoblastic. I like to say it that way, and then the meaning of the word stays in your brain. An iconoclast is somebody who picks up a large aluminum bat, finds the sacred cows of any number of cultures, and just goes and tries to bash those sacred cows, bash those sacred icons. In other words, Chaucer has a beef. He has an axe to grind. Chaucer is torqued off. The way he will get there is to write Canterbury Tales. We're going to ask, what is it that he's upset about? And then we're going to ask, how does he try to address that whole issue of being upset? In our conversation, there'll be two things. One, Chaucer has some serious issues with the church. Now, let's pause for a moment and make sure we understand what I mean by the church. In Chaucer's day, there ain't but one church, and it's what? The Roman Catholic Church, all right? That's all there is. It completely dominates all of Europe and European thought, okay? Just that one church. But by this point in 1350, the church has grown extremely powerful and pretty corrupt. Okay? Corrupt in what way? Primarily this: currency, money. That is to say, Chaucer has some serious problems with religious hypocrisy. Now, what does that word mean, hypocrisy? You know what yeah, you say one thing, but you actually do something quite different, right? Hypocrisy. And the biggest problem for Chaucer within the church is that you have holy religious men and women, priests, friars, nuns, who are not behaving very religiously acceptable at all. They don't behave very holy at all. Chaucer has a problem with this. And so he's going to address, first of all, the religious audience, okay? As I said, he could have written this thing in Latin. The only problem is he wanted to jack on religious people, and the only people who can read Latin are religious people. So this is one of the reasons why he chose to write in English. The second group that Chaucer's going to attack, that's a fair verb for it. The second icon is the whole notion of the sanctity of the marriage and family, and more particularly issues of gender. Okay? During Chaucer's day, you had a strange rule in houses. In every room there was allowed to be one stick. That stick could not be larger than the size of the man's thumb in the house. It was called the rule of thumb. And the reason that stick sat in the room was so that that man could use that stick to smack around his wife. Now we have lots of examples of men getting in trouble for not smacking around their wives with this stick. We don't have any real reasons or references to men damaging their wife's health by hitting on them with this stick. Chaucer is going to challenge what we will call today the gender wars, the differences between men and women, and the way he's going to do it is again through Canterbury Tales. So we're going to find ourselves addressing that topic as well. Now, I should be honest, Chaucer will go after a lot of other icons as well. These are the two that we will focus on. Now, how does he do this? Well, in a word, satire. Let's say it out loud now, satire. Now, what is satire? Because we're going to see satire quite a bit in our study, not only with Chaucer, but with other writers as well. What is satire?
It's like when you bring attention to the flaws.
Yes, you definitely are bringing attention to flaws and problems. Absolutely right. Let's write that one down. That's a brilliant first step towards satire. You got a beef, you got a problem. We've already said Chaucer has a beef with what two groups? The religious group and, of course, this issue of gender. But what else is satire? Sometimes the word irony will be married to the word satire. They kind of go together. What do you think, Mr. Keeley? What is satire? You say one thing, but mean something else. Outstanding. You say one thing, but you mean something quite different. Okay? You say one thing, you mean something quite different. So, for example, you're out on the date from hell, and it's all going terrible, and you say to your friend who's asking how it's going, oh, it's going wonderful. Right? And that sarcasm, that satire is proof, yet you didn't actually mean that everything was going great. You meant to say that everything was going really terrible. Satire. Say one thing, mean something else. Now, let's put it in your notes. Since you're seniors, I'll point this out to you. There's two forms of satire. And in many ways, we could say, the Romans kind of invented this whole idea of rhetorical satire. The Romans, the great Roman people. There's kind of two Roman writers who spent a lot of time writing this kind of satire. One of those guys' name was Horace. The other guy's name was Juvenal. These two writers both write satirically. They make fun, if you will, sarcasm. But one of those writers, Horace, his satire was kind of like what we would call soft or friendly satire. That's when you make fun of your pal and your pal actually laughs back. That's satire. But it's a satire that we would call Horatian. It's kind of soft. Juvenal, on the other hand, he wrote brutal satire. That's the kind of satire where other people might laugh, but you ain't laughing when somebody says it to you because it ain't funny. It's mean, it's biting, it's caustic. That's Juvenalian satire from the great writer Juvenal. Now, when we look at Chaucer, we'll say in our notes that he employs both types of satire. Okay? So, for example, about the prioress or the nun who's along for the trip, he will say about her that she's by no means undergrown.
Wow.
By no means undergrown? Yeah, it's like that really large person I saw who had that t-shirt on that said, I conquered anorexia. See, that's Horatian satire. It's kind of funny, but it's not really mean. Do you know what I'm saying? Chaucer will often use Horatian satire. That is to say, to call someone by no means undergrown means she ain't skinny. Got me? That is to say, she's a little bit corpulent. That is to say, he's saying something about her that's kind of mean, but she herself would probably say, well, thanks for not calling me fat. That is to say, you weren't mean to me when you said I was large. You just simply said I was by no means undergrown. In other words, she's not going to have to worry about the problems of anorexia, bulimia anytime soon because she's so large. That's the point of Chaucer's Horatian attempts. Other times, not so Horatian. Other times, he's going to be just straight up Juvenalian. He's going to be straight up nasty mean. Okay, and when he attacks, he will attack satirically. Because, see, satire is what I often call, there's kind of two ways into your house. One's through the front door, and that's the kind of, that's the kind of essay writing where it's fairly self-evident what it is you're writing about. I don't like X, and so I'm going to talk about. The other kind of satire is through a different door or a window, and you don't see it coming. That's satire. You don't see Juvenalian satire coming most of the time. It's the big aluminum bat. It catches you right about the time you're completely unaware. And a lot of times people won't understand it's satire. They'll think you're serious, and of course it's going to offend. Well, in some ways, Chaucer maybe is serious. I think he's very serious. We called him an iconoclast. He clearly has some real issues, especially with those two institutions, as we already said it, the church and the notion of gender equity or being equal, man and women being equal. Now, how does he do this? Well, it's really kind of fascinating. He sets it all up by creating a story. What is that story for your notes? That story is that Chaucer imagines, this didn't actually happen, he makes it up. Chaucer imagines that he needed to go on a journey, not just any journey, a religious journey. And that journey we call a pilgrimage. Now, it's funny because students today think MTV invented spring break. We, of course, know that spring break is a really old holiday. The Greeks did all of their, how should one say it politely, homework in the spring, where they would have those huge parties and then they would have those plays in different cities around Greece. They would do that in the spring during the time of great growth, okay, of crop growth. So the spring break's a very old idea. We find out from Chaucer in the opening lines of the general prologue that the primary form of entertainment in the spring for English people was to go on a pilgrimage as well. They would go on a little journey where they would go down to a special city called Canterbury in England. Now, what makes this city special is two things. One, it's got an unbelievable cathedral there. A cathedral that you could go and visit still. It's quite remarkable. I mean, when you see it, you're just like, whoa, how long did it take them to build this? But more importantly, inside of the cathedral, there was a very special man. His name was Thomas Becket, and he was killed inside that cathedral. He was assassinated. Immediately, the king who assassinated him had to apologize publicly and repent because Becket was a big-time, respected person, religious person. Immediately around that cathedral and around the town of Canterbury grew up all kinds of superstitions about the cathedral and the burial site of Thomas Becket. Now, let's be fair. A number of people in the town of Canterbury, like the ones who owned the Holiday Inn there, they kind of liked the situation that large numbers of people would come to the town, and if you paid money, you could get close to the tomb of Thomas Becket, and if you weren't feeling very well, you could touch the tomb maybe, and then you would get well, this kind of things going on, right? And people are paying money for this. And the whole town of Canterbury, of course, has become kind of an industry, if you will, making money, right? Okay. So the town of Canterbury, we're told, is a sacred place where people go on pilgrimage. If you will, it's kind of an excuse to get out of town in the spring, all right? Now, the way Chaucer tells us this is to kind of set it up with a series of observations. Let's take a look at it. Notice, it's a series of what we would call when, then observations. Take a look at it. We'll read the first lines again now of the general prologue. When in April, what time of the year? See, we're in spring, right? The sweet showers fall, that is to say in the spring, what happens? If you don't live in a desert, it does what? Right, it rains, doesn't it? And pierce the drought of March to the root, and all the veins are bathed in liquor of such powers brings about the engendering of the flower. The first wind clause says, in the spring, what does it do? It rains, right? And of course the crops then get nice and moist. Line 5. When also, second wind clause. When also Zephyrus. Now, does anyone know what this is? This is your sidebar note here. We call it the west wind. What's Zephyrus? It's the wind of the spring, isn't it? Remember when we did Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, right? We were talking a little bit about that. When also Zephyrus with his sweet breath exhales an air in every grove and heath upon the tender shoots. In other words, when the spring breeze starts blowing. And the young sun is half course in the sign of the ram is run. Everybody was into astrology by this point, right? And of course we have the movement of the stars and all of that. And the small fowl are making melody that sleep away the night with open eye. How do you sleep away the night with open eye? If your eye is open, are you asleep? No. So what are you doing at night if your eyes are open? Okay, so you can always see it, already see it here. We got hanky-pankying being suggested. This is the whole thing from Bambi, Disney's Bambi, about Twitter pated in the spring. For those of you who know anything about that scene, you now know the origin of that scene. Chaucer's opening lines of Canterbury Tales is very, very famous. In other words, what does he say? Well, in the spring it rains, the wind blows, and it's only natural what? That's right. Hanky-pankying happens in the spring. You're absolutely right. Keep going. That sleep away the night with open eyes. Look at the next line, line 11. So nature pricks them and their heart engages. In other words, it's totally natural in the spring for any number of wildlife to decide to hanky-panky. That's one step away from seeming to suggest what? And this answers that whole thing about why, remember we were saying Mr. Giudice was studying about the people of 1350 and the church people kept saying that all they like to do is hanky-panky. You can see Chaucer playing along with that one. Keep reading. Then, he says in the spring, people long to go on pilgrimages, and palmers long to seek the stranger strands of far-off saints hallowed in sundry lands. And specially from every shire's end of England, down to Canterbury they went to seek the holy blissful martyr, quick to give his help to them when they were sick. So in other words, we learned something right away. Hurrah! Giudice was looking to find out something about these people of 1350 England, and one of the things he immediately finds out is that in the spring, for holiday, they like to go on pilgrimage, a holy journey down to the city of Canterbury, where they get to have a good time, you see. Now we continue. It happened in that season, what season? The spring, that one day in southward at the Tabard, as I lay ready to go on pilgrimage and start for Canterbury, most devout at heart. Now, this won't be funny to you. It was to Chaucer's audience, because I'll tell you this. The hotel that he's at sits right next to another establishment called the Bell. And yeah, it's a hanky-panky house, a brothel. Yeah, and what you did is you kind of went to one to visit the other. Notice what he says. It just so happens, stroke of luck, in the spring, I just so happened to be at this hotel. Yeah, later he'll tell us next to the Bell, and most devout of heart, ready to go on pilgrimage, when into the hotel comes a group of people, an entourage. And he says, I find out that they're all going down to Canterbury together, and they invite me. And so we enjoin a certain kind of plan, he says. We all get together, we say, here's the plan. Because we all got to walk down there, and it's a distance, what we'll do is we'll walk along for a while, and then when we get tired, we'll kind of stop, pull over to the side of the road, pull out the brewskis, have a few drinks, and then one of us is going to step up and tell a story or a tale. Simple. And then we'll go on down the road a little further, and we'll pull off to the side of the road again. Second person will step up, tell a story or a tale. We'll do this all the way there and all the way back. When we come back, we will decide which one of the stories was the best, and we'll throw a huge party for the guy or the gal who tells the best story. Now, this is the setup for us, and it allows for Chaucer to be able to tell stories without actually being the one telling the story. I remember when my daughter Ash used to come home from the playground, and the bad boy said the bad word, and then she said the word. and at dinner table. And Mama would say, we do not say that word. I didn't say that word. The bad boy said the F word, and she said it again. And Mama said, we do not say that. I didn't say that word. It was the bad boy who said, and she said it a third time just to make her point. See, Ash wasn't saying the bad word. She was telling us the bad boy said the bad word, and that allowed her to say the bad word without actually saying it. Now, if you watch any news, you probably get a sense of this when they're standing on the front lawn of the White House and they say, a Washington insider today reported a blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry, a Washington insider? A White House insider? Like, who would that be? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to protect my sources. I can't tell you. Do you think it's ever possible that a journalist might just make it up and then say, somebody in the White House told me this, but I can't tell you who? Now, we have a term for that. It's called scaffolding. Have you ever seen a building built and they put scaffolding on? Scaffolding. In other words, what it means is, you don't say it. You let somebody else say it for you, even though there ain't no somebody else. When they then get mad and they come at you, you can say, of course, we're familiar with this in our freshman group. They love to create drama this way, don't they? So, for example, they want to find out what happened on the weekend, and so they will say, so-and-so told me, I heard somebody told me that what happened over the weekend. And then they just sit back and wait for you to divulge it. See how that works? Brilliant. It's a brilliant way to get to information, or to say, I never said that. Somebody else said that. Who? I can't tell you because I don't want you to be mad at them. Perfect. See, there it is. Everything's set up. The beautiful thing about scaffolding is that it puts you one step away from being accused of inventing something. This is exactly what Chaucer will do, and to that degree is pretty brilliant. In the general prologue, though, what Chaucer will do is simply this. He tells us who the entourage is, who's traveling. Now, of course, let's make our point. He makes all this up. He puts this group together of his own creation. This group never actually happened, and he never went to Canterbury with this group. He makes it up. But nonetheless, he gives us what we will call, for your notes, character sketches. Now, later, we will invent the novel, and part of creating a novel is to develop good characters, and we will kind of supply descriptions of those characters, and we'll call them character sketches. The first great character sketcher is actually Chaucer. And he'll go through the general prologue and he'll say, there was this knight that went along with us. Let me tell you about him. There was this religious guy that went along. Let me tell you about him. That kind of thing. All right? And he'll describe them in a little bit of detail, and then he'll just move on to the next guy or gal. Okay? And through the course of the general prologue, all Chaucer really does is introduce the characters. Now, about these characters, let's say something for your notes. Ostensibly, they break down into three categories, we might say. All right? Three groups, and we'll write these in our notes real quickly. Three kind of groups. And what a lot of you will do to make your outline of the general prologue to get ready for the exam is you literally will just make 3 columns on a sheet of paper. This is a great way to do it, to memorize these different characters so you're ready for the exam. You make 3 columns. Above each one of the columns, you'll put the name of the group. The first group is the one best represented, most represented, and that's the group we will call simply the religious. In other words, they're religiously affiliated. They've got some kind of religious duties within the church. They're nuns, they're friars, they're priests, they're sumners, whatever. Okay? So each time that you hear one of these characters and you know they're religious, just put them in that column and then jot down 3 things about that person so you can remember that person. Now, hello, you go to movies. Before the movies, often, they will have what's known as the trailer. Now, for those of you that don't know that term, someone define it for us. What is a trailer? What does that mean? Does anyone know what that means? What's a trailer for a film? So you're going to watch the movie, let's say The Hobbit. But before The Hobbit begins, depending on the theater, you can sometimes have up to 20 minutes of these trailers. What is a trailer?
Kind of like a preview.
It's a preview of films that are coming. Not the film you're about to watch, correct? But other films. Now, for those of you who don't know, in a movie's budget, the trailer is actually one of the most expensive things. No kidding. People who make trailers make serious bank. Why? Because you've got to take a 2-hour movie and reduce it into a 2-minute trailer. So there's going to be all kinds of stuff. Lots of music. Lots of different cuts and angles of the movie. What's the whole point of the trailer? And it usually works, right? The trailer will get you excited to go and watch, not the movie you're there to watch, but another movie. We're all familiar with getting fooled by trailers. Oh, this is going to be such a great movie because I saw the trailer. And you go to the movie and you're like, the entire film was basically in the trailer. This movie stunk. But it got you. It got you to go. Now, put it in your notes. These little character sketches are trailers. Invitation. Why? Because each one of these cats are going to tell a story. Okay? And so if you know something about them, you're going to know something about the story that they're going to tell, or you're going to want to know something about the story they're going to tell. It's a way for Chaucer to get you to read on the actual tales themselves that we call the Canterbury Tales. Of course, named Canterbury because why? They're all going to Canterbury for this special journey or pilgrimage. The first group, again, are the religious. The second group are what we will simply call the upper class. These are people with more money, with bank. They own property. They work in professions where they're a little bit upper class. Okay? That's the second group. And then the third group is what we'll call the working class. That is to say, they're not white-collar workers, they're blue-collar workers, okay? For example, we're told that along the journey there came with them a cook. And Chaucer says about the cook, man, he made a great meal. But the problem was he had this huge sore on his knee. And it exuded pus. Yellow, gross pus. And the problem was that he kept reaching down and rubbing on his knee sore and getting pus on his hands, but he was our cook. So he said the whole time you're eating, you're thinking, you know, this is great food, but I hope none of that wretchedness from, see what I'm saying? That's about all he says about the cook. Little tiny vignettes sometimes that we provide us with a tag, a way to remember. Of course, maybe the story that's told by the cook will be quite fascinating as well. Okay? So you've got three different groups, the religious, the upper class, and kind of the working class. As you go through the general prologue then, you want to identify each one of these characters as belonging to one of those groups, and then you want to try and figure out a couple of things about them. Let me give you an example of how to read to try to figure this out. Watch over on page 146. We're going to meet our first of several not so good religious, okay? I told you Chaucer has a mission or a project. We're about to meet the first part of that. Now, to say about the nun or the prioress that she was by no means undergrown, we don't got to worry about her fighting anorexia anytime soon. That is a again Horatian or soft piece of satire. We're about to look though at a Juvenalian piece of satire. In other words, it is going to be nasty. It's not going to be funny. Well, it'll be funny to some of us, but it definitely wasn't funny to certain people of Chaucer's day who wanted to know exactly where was this person that Chaucer was describing. Oh, I can't remember exactly. You see how that works? They showed up at this hotel, and I don't know, and I just went with them. I can't see what I'm saying. Okay, let's take a look at it. There was a friar. Are you with me on page 146? There was a friar, a wanton one, and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. In all four orders there were none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-tuned speech. He fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Now, the only reason why a number of you are not laughing or going, whoa, 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 what did we just read, is because you don't understand yet the language that we're working with. And this is in translation. Now, here's the deal. Your translators and your people who put together high school anthologies have got to be very careful with Chaucer. There's a reason why just the other day, a certain person walked up to me and said, you still teach in high school English? And I said, yep. He said, are you still teaching Chaucer? And I said, oh yeah. And he said, Chaucer shouldn't be taught in schools. This was a devoutly religious person. There's a reason why he said that to me, and one of them is what we just read here. How about it this way? What if I had translated this to say something like this? There was a preacher along with this. He was a real slut. Now, the minute I do that, right, Miss Mueller goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. Because why? Well, we normally don't think of religious preachers as, having that. I mean, we normally don't say that about them, that they're a real slut. Wait a minute, I'm not done. That's just the first line. Wanton means sexually desiring all the time. Hanky-panking, that's what wanton means, okay? So when your word here is wanton, that's kind of our word for slut. But wait a minute, I'm not done. Look at what else he says. He says this, a religious priest, a friar, the way he's defined The number one thing that defines a good priest or a good nun is what? Do I got any religious in the house that know this? What's the one thing that makes them people of God? They are not married to anyone other than the church, which means they are celibate, which means they are virgins. They don't hanky-panky. That's what defines them as religious. You got me? So if you're a nun or you're a priest, you're not supposed to hanky-panky at all. Okay, at all. That's kind of against, that's the number one rule. Do you hear what Chaucer just said about this guy? Not only is he a slut, but he sleeps with girls within his church, and then he marries them off to men in his church. Whoa! And Cruz Nicholas just does this like, that's not very... Wait, we're not done. Look at what else he says. He says about this guy, he was a noble pillar to his order. In other words, this friar was way better than a lot of other friars that I know of. Whoa. Right. And guys, we're only 6 lines into, well, look at it, page 146, 147, 148. That's the description of the friar. Now, question, why would Chaucer give us this level of Juvenalian satire? Well, we're going to get into that discussion in more detail when we meet another religious named the Pardoner here in a little bit, okay? But the point that I want to make is, this is interesting for us if we understand this is like a trailer. In other words, later in Canterbury Tales, the friar is going to tell a story. Let's just say it's not a story or a tale that makes it into high school anthologies. There's a reason for that, okay? That is to say, you couldn't read it at high school or the teacher would probably get immediately fired. It's always interesting to me that students are stunned when they go and check out online or whatever some of these stories on their own, the monk's tale, the friar's tale, some of these other stories, and they cannot believe, whoa, what is he, what are they doing? The descriptions are extremely specific. Again, Chaucer is going to imagine himself like the first CNN journalist. And when they come to him and say, whoa, what did you just say about the friar? He will say, don't kill the messenger. I'm just telling you what the cat told us. It was a journey I took on a pilgrimage. Where is this friar? I can't remember most of the time. I can't remember his name even a lot of times. I can't remember where he's from. But that's what he said. Don't get mad at me. Okay? It allows for Chaucer to be an iconoclast. Now he goes through the general prologue describing the different people. Lest we imagine that Chaucer is totally anti-religious, and this is the point that I made to my pal who said Chaucer is totally against the church, I will say absolutely not true. Look, for example, on page 153. Notice here we're going to have a different religious person, and he's going to be talked about. Look what Chaucer says about him. A holy-minded man of good renown. That means people, he has a good reputation, people know him. There was, and poor, the parson of a town. So here we have another religious. Now it's altogether possible that Chaucer's playing satiric games with us and saying, just like he said about the friar, he was a noble pillar. And in fact, he meant the opposite. And so immediately we kind of are like, is he being serious or is he kidding, right? But down around line 505 and following, he said, 507, he says, this noble example to his sheep he gave. Sheep, of course, another word for what? He doesn't mean actual sheep. The parson wasn't a shepherd, but he was a shepherd to what? Right, to the religious people who come every day to church for him. Notice what he says about him. That first he wrought, and afterwards he taught. Whoa. Put that in your own words in your notes. What does that mean? What does that mean? First, he wrought, and afterwards he taught. And Mr. Durant, on to page 154, the very last thing